Hello and welcome. Welcome to Freedom from Trauma, an online education series where we're interviewing authors, experts, and teachers to have powerful conversations and bring you profound practices that help heal trauma and consciously create the body, mind, and spirit that you truly desire. Today, our guest is Wendy Bihari. Welcome, Wendy. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Richa. I'm excited to be with you.
Thank you. This conversation we're having during this educational series is all about finding ways to unlock the potential within us to heal and transform and overcome some pretty life-changing traumatic experiences, things that have completely shifted the way we see ourselves, see our life, see our possibilities, and something that you talk about. And you talked about in your first book, Disarming the Narcissist, and I know you're writing another book that we'll be looking forward to next year. You bring to us a lot of education around the subject of narcissism and also how it pertains to sexuality, as well the impact it has on the partners. So there's a lot that I want us to discuss today. And actually, this is an educational series, and I found that education is the first step to help us pause and look at things differently so that we can have that freedom from our trauma. And it comes from awareness. So, so with that, I would love to hear from you why this subject for you, why narcissism, and how did you begin on this journey of becoming an expert in this field?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. I also appreciate the series that you're hosting because it is so incredibly important. And I was watching a trailer for Gabor Mate's new upcoming docu-series on trauma, where he makes that one statement that I know you understand so well, which is trauma is not just what happens to us. It's what happens to us within ourselves. It's the way we react to what has happened to us. And I've seen both in working with narcissistic individuals themselves in the treatment room, as well as those who have been afflicted by the trauma of betrayal from a narcissist who has hypersexuality problems or other more serious aggressive issues, that it's that reaction to it. It's why what you're doing, which is providing education, becomes so central to healing. Because when you understand better, when you know better, you understand narcissism, you understand what it means, you understand why people become this way, you begin to immediately liberate yourself from those entrapments that can keep us feeling either just self-blaming, avoidant, or just further traumatized if you've already suffered. So my own interest in narcissism, as I talk about it in my book, really goes back to my training. I was so triggered the first time I was in consultation with someone with narcissistic issues. I didn't even know what to call it back then. I was young, I was new to the field, but I was always a pretty sturdy individual. Not perfectly so, but this particular client just knocked me off my feet, and I literally could feel myself as if I was drifting back in time, responding as if my life depended on it, to his attack towards me, his criticisms in this survival mode. You know, I was giving in, I was apologizing, I was feeling like I did something wrong. And I was also at the same time, I had this awareness that this is weird. So my journey really began with a lot of curiosity about my own observation of how I responded, really wanted to understand more about this type of client in the treatment room, and began to investigate, began to study, began to experiment. And I mean, I didn't choose to specialize in narcissism. As my colleagues always joke, that would be masochistic. But I did find it to be an incredibly powerful and rewarding journey for me, you know, and it's been a rewarding area of expertise because I've learned how to work with them. I've learned how to be sturdy in the face of them. I've dealt with them in my personal life. And I know better now how not to own their wounds and own their gaslighting. And that's really essential, to keeping yourself in a healthy stance, whether you're living with them, you're leaving them, you're contemplating what to do.
So it looks like narcissism chose you. You didn't choose.
In a way, yes.
Well, we have so much to be grateful for that happened, because I've already learned so much from you, and I really appreciate that. Now you had a setting where this was a professional setting and you learned so much, and many of us encounter this in our intimate relationships, whether it's as a child, having narcissistic, a parent or parents, siblings, or a spouse,
Yes.
or serial spouses, meaning first husband was, speaking from a woman's perspective, first husband, second husband, and then repetitive pattern. And you find yourself believing the story that the narcissist has been selling you, because you've literally changed a view of yourself.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. That's the danger. That's the danger for sure.
So when you deal with, when you have a narcissist in your life, it could be a boss, it could be an intimate relationship, or a client. What are some of the signs? How can we tell that this is their stuff? We don't need to own it. How do we start to build that boundary, that awareness?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's an important one. In the treatment room, it's important for diagnostic purposes because it helps us to think about how we're going to proceed with therapy. And I often say I think you can do this in your personal life too. You can diagnose this from your gut to some degree. And what I mean by that is, let's start with this, Richa. I think narcissism happens along a spectrum. And as you and I were chatting about earlier, it's out there in this way where the whole universe is now using the term narcissism. Once upon a time, that was pretty limited to the professional world of clinicians and mental health therapists. So now everyone's calling everyone a narcissist if they even show the slightest bit of, self-attention or self-directedness. Narcissism happens from the very subtle to the very severe. So we think of it as happening on a spectrum. There is a narcissistic personality disorder at the further end of the spectrum. But what you're feeling when you're in the presence of a boss or a partner, friend, someone who has narcissistic issues is you feel like you're invisible. You feel like you disappear, or you feel like you're very visible, but only as the target for someone's criticism, the target for someone's blame, the opponent in a debate or in a contest where there's a right answer and you better figure out what that is. So it's usually one or the other, where people will say, I feel erased when I'm in the presence of this. But I treat mostly narcissistic men, and their partners will say, I just feel erased when I'm with him. It's like I'm there and I'm not there. My sentences are always interrupted. My thoughts are pretty much not heard. My feelings are seen as not material to the conversation, or they are criticized for being dramatic. So you're with someone who is highly self-absorbed, who has tendencies towards either being very aloof, showing off. They can also be incredibly charming and seemingly very heroic, always rushing to the rescue to solve your problem and swoop you off your feet and fix everything for you, except when it's something they've done that's offended you. And then watch out, because trying to get their help and their resolution to conflict when they are the perpetrator of the conflict is a very different story.
Yeah. When you talk about the hypersexual narcissist, are you also referring to what's known as a sex addict or sexaholic, or is there a distinction between hypersexuality and sex addiction?
They're very similar. I mean, there really isn't much distinction. I use the term hypersexuality with narcissists because almost everything they do to soothe themselves becomes excessive. It's like they're in overdrive. And that also includes their sexual tendencies. So the narcissist, because of their makeup, their psychological makeup, is very difficult for them to engage in vulnerable, intimate, real conversations. It's difficult for them to expose vulnerability or any levels of what they would consider weakness, which we would just consider humanness.
Mhm.
And so when they're not busy and distracted with work or with, winning someone's attention and approval or winning the debate, they're typically soothing themselves through stimulation, through something that's pretty active, stimulating, exciting, where there's a rush, like sex. And it's not surprising that the narcissist who's not very good at intimacy will tend to gravitate towards things like pornography and paid sex and cyber sex and even the fling or affair, because it's all about them, right? I can have it when I want it, on my terms, at my convenience, and I don't have to give anything back. There doesn't have to be an intimacy factor involved in this sexual experience. Problem for narcissists is that they don't have good limits. It's one of the things missing in their makeup is that ability to know where the limit is. And I don't mean that a little bit of acting out is okay, because it isn't. I'm talking more like when I'm treating them, it's so destructive for them. The more excessive the involvement in whatever it is, it's spending money, it's gambling, it's drugs, it's sex, whatever it is, the more excessive it becomes, the harder it is to pull back, the harder it is to change the architecture in the brain that has now been affected by these behaviors. But oh my, the offended parties of these individuals. And I see far too many who have been afflicted by what we call a betrayal, the betrayal trauma of dealing with someone who has hypersexual narcissism. And what makes them a little different than your typical sex addict is that the narcissist feels entitled to it. Remember, they have a great sense of entitlement. And so they feel, I can do what I want. And what's the big deal? And it's your fault anyway, because you don't show enough sexual interest in me. And I just have a really high libido because I'm more than just a man. I'm really a man.
Mhm.
And this is what men do. And so get over it. So there's a really strong kind of self-defining principle of superiority around this. There's a great sense of entitlement and justification. There's a great sense of blaming in the process. That is when they get found out.
Mhm.
And, in the beginning, they'll deny it. They'll try to make you feel like you're crazy. They'll do all the gaslighting, distorting types of techniques. And eventually, when they can't hide the actual evidence, it's not a big deal. So I've seen many a partner who has been, and still is in some cases, suffering from the trauma of being so violated by this person who's supposed to be your trusted other, your safe place.
Mhm. So you have partners who are in a relationship or married to someone who is self-absorbed, entitled, and potentially with, I think, what's being called an intimacy disorder now.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
who can't
Yes.
have relationships and with intimacy and find that unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
So is this something outside of, because we'll get into what the betrayed partner can do for themselves,
Yeah.
but as a condition itself, narcissistic personality disorder, can that be treated? Is there hope for a turnaround for narcissists, or is it really about just the partner getting strong and finding their way out of the marriage or relationship?
Yeah, that's the very perhaps most popular question that I get from people who reach out to me. Can this be ameliorated? Is there hope? Is there a cure? The answer is it's complicated, but the answer is yes. Yes, I've worked with narcissistic men for 30 years. And so I know I'm only one person speaking. I know other people who work with them, not many, unfortunately, because most people don't want to treat narcissists. But I have seen, although the numbers aren't super high, when you have the right combination of leverage, the right treatment approach, and a therapist who's learned how to work with them, meaning that, I've learned how to develop a sturdy enough spine where I don't get tricked very easily. I don't get thrown. I don't take it personally when they attack me, overtly or covertly. So you need that. You need a therapist who's sturdy and experienced. You need a model that really works, it's proven. And you need leverage. And what that means is there has to be a consequence that's meaningful enough to bring them to therapy and to keep them in therapy. And that might be the fear of losing the partner who has said, get help or get out, or the boss or the grown children or the law in some cases will mandate it. So with those three elements in place, there is a chance for meaningful change, but it's not short term. It's hard work. It's exhaustive work, but it's possible to get change. You know, nobody changes completely. No one changes. We all have memories. We're all subject to our experiences. We always remember. And so we can be triggered. Narcissists won't change completely, but you can get change in those areas that are harmful to the relationship and harmful to a partner's sense of well-being.
And from that perspective, what's coming to me is that unaddressed, it only gets worse, because there's no block, there's no boundary, there's no, hey, you got to stop this behavior is damaging.
Yes, that's right. They will not get better on their own. That doesn't happen. It's unfortunate for so many who have, you know, I host this online membership community for people who are dealing with this issue. It's a kind of support group online with education. And so many who have said, you know, it's taken me 30 years to realize that I can't change this. And that's a hard reality to have to face, but they don't change on their own. They do need help to make those changes because it's such a complicated personality. I mean, there are some at the subtle end of the spectrum, and perhaps you can have enough influence. They can read, they could go to a retreat, they could attend a conference, something that might actually make a difference if they're really on the more benign end of that spectrum. But most, from the moderate to severe end, really need the help to make the difference.
So, interesting thought question. How does that go when you tell someone they're a narcissist and you need to find treatment? Because that's the last thing they want to hear, because, you know, in their mind, they're always right, and there could be nothing ever wrong with them. So how do you tell a narcissist? How do you communicate that?
Well, you don't use the word narcissist because it is, as we know, there's nothing pretty about that label. It's a pejorative term. It's used pejoratively, and the narcissist can't be seen in anything but the glowing light, right? So, you know, using the word narcissist is not going to be helpful. And in most cases, they'll turn it on you and say, you're the narcissist. It's always about you and what you want. I'm not saying you're wrong if you've already done that. Don't beat yourself up for it. It's perfectly human and normal to just want to find something to call it and to say it out loud. But it probably won't be that helpful to someone who's truly narcissistic. You're better looking around in your life, in your relationship, and trying to figure out, what could I put out there that I'm actually ready to enforce that would make the stakes high enough and the consequences meaningful enough that the narcissist might consider getting help. So a lot of people will say, well, I'm not ready to end the relationship yet, but what else could I do? And that's when I coach them to think about the future. You could propose that, well, I don't want this relationship to end, and I hope that we can find a way forward. I'm very sad as I look ahead and I see that our pathways are inevitably going to end up splitting because this is so painful and it's not working and we're not good at this. Notice the we doesn't sound fair to someone who has been so afflicted by it. And yet the we is only thing that's going to get the narcissist's ear. If you do this, you, it's not likely to happen unless you're ready to really say, you get help or we're done. And then you have to be ready. And if that's meaningful enough to the narcissist, they'll get help. But if you're not there, you've got to find other ways to create that leverage, either by predicting it down the road, looking for perhaps some support from family members, other people, where you can do almost an intervention to address it with them so they hear the echo of what you're saying coming from others as well. But you have to have that leverage.
Yeah. So in all of this, now focusing on the betrayed partner or the partner of this narcissistic person, where does that person start their journey of empowerment and healing, finding their voice? I guess a lot of areas that they have to look at.
Yeah, so it's so very hard because, when we think about, I have recently, I recently myself interviewed Dr. Jill Manning out of Colorado, who is an expert in the area of betrayal trauma, and I follow a lot of her work and her resources. And I think, what I've learned from my own experience of working with people who have betrayal trauma and some of the other experts who I admire is, let's start with this for the people listening, who are trying to find what resonates for them in what I'm saying. When you are traumatized by a violation against you by a stranger, you can run home to your partner, you can run home to a family member and be embraced by their comfort, their reassurance, their protection. You know, although you may fear in your flashbacks that it's going to happen again, but most likely that violation will not happen again when it happens by a stranger. But when you've been violated by the person who's supposed to be that refuge, that safe person, that trusted other, you're literally living with the perpetrator. And every time you look to them, you can't go to them for comfort because they caused the pain. And if they're narcissistic types, which is the types I work with, then there's no movement. They're so defended, they're so guarded, they're so adamant about their righteousness. Even those that will apologize will be incredibly impatient with you to get over it. So the apology is very, very short-lived, and the apology is very self-absorbed. Okay, I said I'm sorry. What do you want from me? You want my blood? What do you want to do? You want to nail me to a cross? Is that what you want to do? So you get a very cynical, haughty, impatient, not really an apology, not really remorseful, certainly lacking empathy for your experience. So being violated, being betrayed by a partner who also has issues of narcissism means there's very little room for healing together, because it does, if you're going to stay in this and you want to restore trust, you've got to work at this together. And the narcissist has a lot of work to do in order to understand why they did what they did, understand what it feels like to walk around in your skin, and then to be able to appreciate the impact and, work on not doing it again, because they're really beginning to make sense out of how this all got motivated inside of them. Okay, that's for the couple. But if you are the betrayed partner trying to figure this out on your own, first of all, you really want to have some kind of support, some kind of help to firm up that realization that you didn't cause this. This isn't your fault. Even if you're listening and you're thinking, well, I'm not that sexually interested. My libido has really changed. I tend to be more inhibited. I've gained weight. I pay a lot of attention to the kids. That has to stop immediately. Even if all those things are true and they're creating some disappointment, they're creating a hardship for your partner, something that needs to be addressed or worked on, there's other choices rather than stepping outside the relationship and cheating and betraying you. So first of all, the narcissist has responsibility for their actions. They have other options. They can talk about it. They can work on it. They could ask for therapy if they're not satisfied, if they're struggling with their own impulsivity and that need to be in the rush and that need to have, new experiences. They owe that to you, because a relationship is about informed consent, that you're being informed about what it is you're consenting to stay in that relationship. So number one, we've got to remove self-blame. You've got to find ways to create peaceful, safe places for yourself where you can breathe, where you can create compassion and love for that part of you that is wounded by this, where you can begin your recommitment to your own healing and wellness and your own sense of healthy entitlement to be loved well and cared for by whoever out there in the world you're connected to. It's a long journey because it's trauma. And it's a big part of that journey is being able to remove any doubt about your cause, the cause and effect issue. And while a lot of women will listen and say, I know it's not my fault. And I say, you know it's not your fault. Do you know it's not your fault?
Yeah.
Do you feel it in your bones? Is there anything lingering from this? Because the discovery can be so disabling and so upsetting, and you don't even realize that. In fact, I'm dealing with a kind of PTSD, a post-traumatic stress disorder, a post-traumatic stress reaction to what just happened to me in my most profound relationship.
Yes. And as you were saying, what's showing up here on the surface level is this behavior of narcissism, but underneath that, both partners have their own, what's under the surface. It's like the tip of the iceberg's showing up, but what's underneath that is all these previous pre-existing perhaps traumas that go back to the childhood for both. Because if I have childhood abuse and trauma in my story of childhood, it creates a condition that has me self-blame, that has me take responsibility for being the bad child. And therefore now I continue in my life as the bad adult, as the bad girl. And perhaps the spouse also has that story from childhood that I was abused. And if I don't push hard, I won't get what I want. I don't know what that is, but I'm just asking, is that how much does that play into it, and what do you see in your office?
Oh, so much, Richa. That's a keen observation on your part, because it's not surprising, that very often these situations that happen in adult life will activate memory and activate the very beliefs and emotions and sensations that live inside of us from early painful life experiences. And so if you were, as you said, if you were a child who grew up being made to feel that you had no value and no worth, and it's your fault every time something happens, or you're deprived, or you were abandoned, you were abused in your life as a child, you're carrying all of that complex traumatic material inside of you. And now you have this situation with a narcissistic partner in your life who's very capable of making you believe, because it lives within you, making you believe that it's your fault, or you're crazy, or what did you expect? You knew this was going to happen. It was just a matter of time. And what's the big deal? And get over yourself. And who do you think you are? Words that have this familiar ring, familiar melody from once upon a time. And so it's easy for the two to get connected and integrated, and you're stuck, not knowing where the truth lies. And that's where support and help, professional help, teasing this out, reading, listening to programs like yours, to educate, to learn, to unlearn those scripts that are so distorted that live inside of us. As I've said to so many people who have what you were describing, what we call schemas in the model that I practice, who have a schema, meaning a life trait that has strong emotional sensation, where they can tell themselves, but I'm defective, I'm broken. I mean, it's the story of my life, Wendy. And I say, and I believe you that this is what you experienced. And I believe you that you had a father who told you that you were worthless. And I believe you that your father said, you know what, you'll see what happens to you, and threatened you. I believe you. But you know what else? He was wrong. And that's just something that a little child can't quite absorb. We can't absorb the wrongness of our parents because we're little and we need them and we rely on them to know ourselves. So Yes, that happened to you, but that doesn't mean it was right. And so there's a lot of unraveling, unlearning, and what we call rescripting through the use of that beautiful resource called the imagination to experience what it's like to get our needs met and to change that rigid truth or schema that we've carried for far too long, because that's the only way we can stand on solid ground and be sturdy enough when you're dealing with a narcissist in any way, shape, whether it's your boss, it's your partner, especially if it's your partner, because there's not too much escape there unless you actually literally end it. But any narcissist in your life, you've got to have that sturdy spine. We've got to make sense out of our own lives in order to do that. And that doesn't mean becoming ferociously angry, because that's exhausting. So I don't advise people to become ferociously angry. It feels good, it feels strong, and God knows you're entitled to be angry when you've been betrayed, but you don't want to linger in that stance for too long, because that just, really compromises our health and wellness. You want to be able to get a stance where you're just firm, you have a new limits, new boundaries, you know who you are, you know your worth and value, and you're moving forward.
Like you had said at the beginning, these types of relationships are exhausting.
Yeah.
And narcissists will have you continuously pay attention to them if they could control how you spend your time, just to have you focus just on them. And in this dynamic, I think the first step would be for the partner to perhaps own their own attention and self-care for themselves so that they can become healthy enough to say no and stand up for themselves. How does a partner do that in a way that doesn't instigate more attack while also honoring their own boundary?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, it's hard and it won't work. Maybe the first time, the second time, it may take 10 times before it becomes crystal clear to the narcissist in your life that you're not dancing that dance anymore, that the choreography has changed. So there's a strategy that I teach called empathic confrontation. This comes right out of Schema Therapy, which is the model I practice. So empathic confrontation means, what do I already know about X, the narcissist in this case? What do I already know that enables me to get their attention so they can hear me while confronting them and holding them accountable at the same time? So it might sound something like this in the treatment room, but this is something you can use in everyday life. I might say, Joe, look, I know in your line of work, you're very used to barking an order and people jump and they listen. But that doesn't work. But here's the confrontation. So I understand, there's the empathy. And I also understand that, in your once upon a time, as long as you were getting the best grades and being a sports star for your father, anything goes. You could scream, shout, yell, curse, and there were no limits. I get it. That's not your fault. But in the world of relationships, in real life with people, that's offensive. It pushes people away. And even though it may not be your intention to hurt them, it hurts. And that's what you're not good at. That's something you're not used to. So something I would be at the same time coaching the partner to be able to do at home is to say something like, honey, I know you didn't mean to be hurtful, but you know what? Ouch. Not doing that. We're not going down that path again. I can see it on your face. I can see the mood you're in. Oh, what? You're a mind reader? No, I just know you. I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying to you, I'm not doing that anymore. So in the spirit of protecting this relationship, I'm going to leave the room right now. And what you're doing is just dropping the little seeds, as I say, in the soil. Drop the little seeds in and hope that something might harvest from that. But it takes time and energy. It's still exhausting because you're changing the pattern. But it's a change that in the moment you're saying it, you can feel yourself hosting this new advocate inside. And this new advocate who's taking a stand for you. And that's a win, no matter what the narcissist says. They can have a temper tantrum in the corner. Doesn't matter. You're still there for you. And it might be the first time in your life there's been a voice there for you.
Yeah.
So it's an important practice, but when you can combine empathy, which again, let's remember, empathy is not sympathy, empathy is not compassion, empathy is a deep, solid understanding of the person you're speaking to. So I know that when you're tired like this, things don't go well for us. That's empathy. I get you, right? So we're not going to have the conversation right now. Oh, what? You're in charge of all the conversations? Yeah, I think I have to be in charge of these because we're not doing a good job. And the better part of you would probably agree with me if you were in a different state of mind. So good night, right? And you move on. Takes a lot of work because you're really working your insides to not give in to the temptation to take the bait, go into the fight, go into the shutdown, go into the pleading, go into the desperation when they start threatening, you'll be sorry, to really try hard not to take that bait.
Mhm. I love how you said hosting an advocate within. The schema therapy model that you practice, can you walk us through what that looks like from beginning to, through the process?
Yeah, I'll try to give you a quick overview. It's a very rich, beautiful model that was created.
Yes, sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was founded by Dr. Jeffrey Young, and it's been around for quite a while. It's a model that appreciates, let me see how I can say it quickly and easily. It's a model that looks at the fact that parenting's a hard job. No one gets it right perfectly. All children will come into the world with certain emotional needs for their development, and not all those needs will be adequately met, either because there's a problem in the caregiving, there's a problem in the school system, there's a problem with the siblings, the guardians of the child. There's temperamental issues in the child that combined with the environment, the nature nurture idea, is going to create these life themes. And we have 18 identified ones that we call early maladaptive schemas. The work of the therapy is really to identify these life themes based in your once upon a time story. It's to see how, under what conditions in the here and now, as you and I were just discussing, they get triggered. So they are likely to get triggered if you're in a relationship with a narcissist. Whereas you can be out with your friends and nothing gets triggered. You're in your healthy adult mode and you're feeling just fine. So we look at activating conditions, and the work is really to use experiential strategies that have been shown to be highly effective at we can't change what happened in our lives, but we can change the way it's been organized in our brain. And so the proposal is that when early unmet emotional needs get met through imagination, through the therapy relationship, through education and teaching our patients how to get those needs met in their other relationships outside, when that happens, then schemas weaken. When that happens, then the way you've learned to cope, the child who was told that they were worthless when they were young and carries a sense of defectiveness may have very successfully as a child just been very good, did all the right things, keep the peace, don't fight back. And now at the age of 40 is still doing the same thing when they get triggered. So while it was helpful as a child, it's not helpful in the here and now. But when your brain is hijacked by memory, we just do what we know how to do to survive. So the model is very much aimed at identifying these coping modes, identifying all that kind of lives within us under certain conditions, and unlearning it, rescripting it, and feeling and savoring and absorbing, the beauty of truth about who we are. It's not about making everyone feel like they're perfect. It's about really looking very clearly at the fact that you were alone. Or yes, you were really deprived of what you needed. It's not about blaming parents. We're not interested in just going back and blaming everybody in the past. We're interested in getting our eyes on this vulnerable part that lives in all of us, this vulnerable part that is so powerful when we get activated, and really caring for that part and healing that part.
That's beautiful. This
So,
is like really looking at it from a really going deep within the stories, the schemas that we're carrying, and some are known, some are perhaps unknown and to be discovered
yes,
in these in this modality.
yes, yes. And with narcissists, it's so much about helping them to learn how to connect. What they're really brilliant at is performing. And when you go back in their story, what you're almost always going to find is there was a lot of emphasis on performance. And so they become performance masters. But the area of connection and just being loved unconditionally, that's usually the big gaping hole in the background. And that's the part that has to be filled.
Now, in a family system where there are children involved, all ages, and children still at home, let's just say,
Yeah.
and you have a partnership that is impacted by narcissism and a betrayed partner, can you speak to what whoever is probably the person watching this series is the betrayed partner, just because of the nature of this show?
Yeah.
And so, what would you say to them in terms of the steps that can be put in place, either in languaging or holding space or creating a safe container as for the family while this turmoil and trauma exists in their life and they're trying to sort it out?
Yeah. And it's so hard, as you said, when you have children in the house too at the same time. And since COVID-19, the contacts I've had from so many people in this scenario that you just described who feel really trapped
Yeah.
because everyone's working at home, kids are home, and you have this heavy, lingering betrayal that you've just discovered either right before COVID or during COVID. It's very painful. I would say, first of all, you need to designate a space, even if it's in your imagination, because we can use the imagination for that when it's not physically possible. But you've got to designate ideally a little space, even if it's a chair in the corner of the room, but something that's just yours to go to for comfort, for soothing, for meditation, for breathing, for music, for just being with yourself, perhaps reading affirmations. You want to have that in place. If you can do it, if you don't already have a therapist, you might consider having someone you can talk to, even if it's just occasionally, to get some outside support or be part of a supportive community. Um, I think you want, although this is hard in times like this, you still want to do your best to try to not engage because your children are present. And under these conditions, it's not like the children are at school, you can have a conversation, or the children are outside playing. Well, maybe they are. I mean, if the weather is nice and you're fortunate, the children may still be outside playing. So you have some time where you could engage in conversation. But the tension is so high right now that I've been encouraging more people to just disengage. Keep yourself sort of in your own little imaginary bubble and care for yourself. Do all you can to do that self-caring work. Read. Um, be selective about what you read, though. The temptation, again, is to go towards reading things about the narcissist is Satan, he's a demon. And the demonizing of another person can feel good in the moment. But what is it we're really trying to do? We're trying to let ourselves off the hook. You don't have to be on the hook. You didn't do anything wrong. So there's nothing to defend. I'd say the more information you can get about narcissism and understand it, the freer you will feel. It's not designed to make you feel sorry for them. It's designed to help you to see that this is an individual who has a big, big bunch of problems. This is their issue. This is not about you. You are affected by it, but you did not cause it. This is not because you're not smart enough or beautiful enough or skinny enough or anything enough. This isn't about you. And you don't have to tolerate it. So if your plan is to exit, but you can't do it right now safely, you can work on your exit strategy.
Mm-hmm.
You can start planning your exit strategy, start thinking about what it is that you want to gravitate towards. consult, get some legal consultation, look for a lawyer who specializes in narcissism. They are out there now, and that's what you want, because it's a very, very different experience. If you are someone who's going to enter the divorcing world, it's a different experience when you're divorcing a narcissist, particularly one who, by the way, is carrying a boatload of shame underneath all this bravado. Mm-hmm. Narcissists are terribly insecure individuals underneath all the bluster that they put out there. And the hypersexual narcissist knows deep inside their core that what they're doing is not okay. And they carry massive amounts of shame about that. Knowing that that could be exposed in a public way makes them incredibly vengeful at times. So you want a lawyer who specializes in narcissism and will know what they're addressing across the table. So that's a tip that I've been sharing more recently with some of the partners who've contacted me about how do I plan my exit from this individual.
You're absolutely right. This COVID-19 period has been absolutely seen an uptick in the number of cases of, filing for separation or divorce or just trauma, just coaching calls, life coaching, therapy calls. It's just, it's just brought everything, intensified everything, brought it up to the surface. And it's kind of like, it's always been there. The trauma has always been there. It's just under the radar, and it just kind of got into this compression chamber, and it's just become visible.
Yes.
It's like, what did this just happen overnight? To that, I say, for me personally, from what I've understood, is that it didn't happen overnight. We were tolerating it for years and years and years, and it just came into this like under the microscope, and it just became like, I can't tolerate this anymore, and I can't do this for the rest of my life.
Yes,
so exactly. It's kind of this period of mega healing and a great, like detox of life.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. And the hypersexual narcissist who can't get their daily fill of what they need because they are trapped by COVID will start breaking the rules, which makes them even more dangerous and threatening in COVID times. So many partners who are saying, my narcissistic partner will not follow the rules, not wearing the mask, not staying indoors, going to public places, exposing my children, and being careless with, their material on their websites and their pornography, and allowing things to be just a little more visible, which makes it again now the worry and the heartbreak for the impact on the children. So it's very complicated right now because everything has become, as you just said so beautifully, a much more toxic event than was perhaps even obvious before.
Right. So I know you're writing a second book on narcissism and narcissistic hypersexuality and the partner's experience. Can you tell us about your upcoming book?
Yeah, my upcoming book is actually going to be a third edition of my book is now in its second edition. And my third edition will include a lot more material on this topic. So I've expanded the content. I'm elaborating the content on hypersexuality and perilous narcissism and the dangers and more high-risk behaviors that create aggression and violence and the need for safety, focusing more on the betrayed partner and some of what you and I have been talking about, giving more strategies for healing and self-care, and talking a lot more about co-parenting with a narcissist, whether you're living with them or you're living apart from them, which is a very challenging issue as well.
You can only imagine how hard that might be, because the hook of, oh, I need to improve to stay in this relationship is now gone. And so now that there's freedom from the relationship, why do I need to be good? I can just be what I want to be. And so that's a whole other subject. We'll have to have another conversation on that. It's just parenting. How do you consciously parent with a partner?
And if you have a hypersexual narcissist that you have already been traumatized by in your own life, and now you are divorcing, there's that whole worry of what will my little ones be exposed to when they're in his custody.
Right.
Will he be careful? Will he be mindful? Will he protect them? It just raises the bar even higher. It's so hard because there's no perfect solution, but that doesn't mean that, one has to surrender to hopelessness. There is hope. And there are ways to sturdy yourself and to use the law and to use your voice. And it's all about caring for you, being more self-focused than perhaps a lot of partners are comfortable with.
Or have ever known to be, having gone through this. It's a form of abuse, relationship abuse.
Yes.
And so the battery from that in itself, emotional and mental, can totally weaken your own resolve to have a voice or choose a voice. And so building that, I can imagine that is probably a lifelong practice for someone who's been through this experience.
Yes. Yeah. It certainly is.
Yeah. So as we're getting ready to wrap up this amazing conversation, as you could probably see, I was just really loving our conversation, because there's just so much about this topic that's not known. And it's for those who haven't experienced it, it's something that's so intimate, that happens behind closed doors, that you don't really see these behaviors out in public. In public, you see the bright, shiny personas, but you don't actually see unless you know what this is. And if you've experienced it, you know exactly what we're talking about.
Yes.
So it's such a hidden condition in some ways. Does that make sense?
Yes, and what you just said is incredibly important, Richa, because many of the partners that I work with will say, out there in the public, he looks like a prince. He's sweet, he's charming, he volunteers, he shows up, he's a community person, he's larger than life, and no one would maybe it is me, maybe it is my fault, maybe I'm the narcissist. And it's really so sad and hard. I look at them and say, no, you're not. No, you're not. The narcissist is a master of performance, and they're only out there with the crowd for limited amounts of time. When they come home to you, you get tiny fragments of the good and large gaping amounts of the really intolerable behaviors. You become the target, and they feel entitled to do so because it is so hard for them to continue to hold that front. They can do it out there for public performance and approval. And that's just all part of the pathology of narcissism, which makes it even more heartbreaking when I hear partners starting to question themselves because the narcissist does such a good job in the public eye.
Yeah, absolutely. Pathology of narcissism. Yeah. That it's nothing that you caused or you can control other than divert that attention to yourself.
Right.
So yeah, thank you so much, Wendy, for this really profound conversation, and also for all the work that you're doing and bringing to us through all the resources you have available on your website as well. Excuse me. So I would love to invite everybody watching or listening to this to absolutely reach out, leave us a comment, leave us a question, ask Wendy anything you'd like on the page below. And leave your feedback. What did you think of this conversation? What spoke to you the most? What are some of the takeaways? What are you thinking now, having heard this conversation? Do let us know. And I'm sure Wendy would love to hear from you. And Wendy, I know that you generously offered to anyone that emails you or requests a copy of your book. Would you like to say something about that? A few words about that book, please?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to share my book and to give people. I mean, you can purchase my book by going to my website. You can get it for the best price, really, on Amazon. So that's available, certainly. And I think as part of the program, we were going to offer a little gift bonus for a couple of people who are listening in.
Yes.
So I'll let you decide how that happens and what the details are. And I'm really happy to participate in that effort. And I love to hear people's comments and questions. So thank
I
you
bet
so much for that.
I bet there will be a few for sure. And I'll have some follow-up ones as well. So I really appreciate your time and your sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. And I know that we'll be speaking again soon. So thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Richa. It's really a pleasure.
Thank you everyone for watching this episode, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.